Imagine waking up from painful surgery, weak, disoriented, and desperate to go home, only to find that your own son, the child you raised, refuses to pick you up. That's exactly what happened to me. But what they didn't know is that their cold-blooded betrayal would cost them everything. If you've ever been underestimated, abandoned, or treated like a burden by the people you love most, hit that like button. Subscribe, because what you're about to hear is not just a revenge story. It is a lesson in karma, justice, and why you should never mess with someone who gave you life. I'm a 67-year-old woman. I'm not perfect, but I've lived my life working hard, raising a son as a single mother after his father walked out. I skipped meals so he could eat. I worked overtime shifts so he could have new clothes for school when all I wore were thrift store hand-me-downs. He was my world. I thought I was his too. Fast forward. Life took its toll. Years of back-breaking labor left me with chronic pain. Doctors finally said I needed surgery. Nothing too glamorous, just a hip replacement. But it was major enough that I need someone to take me home and help me around for a few days. And of course, who else would I rely on but my only son, the one I had given everything for? 2. The injustice, cold abandonment. The surgery went fine. I was groggy, sore, and exhausted when the nurse wheeled me into recovery. They said, "Ma'am, you'll be ready to go home this evening once your son arrives." So I called him. His voice was cold. Mom, listen, it's not a good time. Sarah, his wife, and I have plans tonight. Can't the hospital call you a cab?" My stomach sank. A cab? After major surgery? I couldn't even walk without help. I pleaded. "Son, I can't manage alone. Please, I need you just this once." Silence. Then his wife's voice in the background, annoyed. "We're not babysitters, Tom. She'll be fine." Then, click. He hung up. The nurse looked at me with pity. I forced a smile, pretending everything was fine. But inside I was breaking. Hours passed. Evening came. My phone never rang. My son never showed. Finally, a volunteer nurse, an older woman, took pity on me. She said, "Sweetheart, you shouldn't be alone. I'll drive you home myself." Imagine that. A stranger with a bigger heart than my own flesh and blood. That car ride home was quiet. I stared out the window, feeling more abandoned than I had ever felt in my life. At home, I struggled inside with my walker. Every step was agony. Every movement a reminder that I wasn't loved. I cried myself to sleep that night. And then something changed. The next morning, I woke up not weak, but furious. I thought, I gave him life. I sacrificed everything. And this is how he repays me, by leaving me to rot in a hospital bed. That anger became fuel. If they thought I was weak, helpless, disposable, they were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. See, here's the part my son and his wife never cared to ask about. Over the years, I had quietly saved and invested. Small amounts, but consistent. I lived frugally. No one ever knew. By the time I retired, I had built up a nest egg that was substantial. Not billionaire level, but let's just say, enough to change someone's life forever. My will originally left everything to my son. House, savings, retirement accounts. I thought it was fair. He was my only child. But that night, lying in pain, I rewrote everything in my head. If he couldn't be there when I needed him most, why should he benefit when I was gone? Days later, he finally called. Not to check on me, not to apologize, but to ask about money. "Hey, Mom, hope you're okay. By the way, Sarah and I are thinking about buying a bigger house. You know, once your situation is settled." You did put me down as your beneficiary, right? That word, settled, felt like a knife. He was already counting me out. I smiled through the phone. "Don't worry, son. Everything will be taken care of." If only he knew what that meant. I contacted my lawyer. We redid my will. Every penny, every asset, every possession, redirected. Who got it? Not my ungrateful son, not his selfish wife. Instead, half went to charities that help single mothers. The other half went to the hospital foundation, the very place where strangers showed me more kindness than my family ever had. But I wasn't done. I had one last card to play. My house. He had always assumed it would be his someday. So I put it in trust, to be sold, with proceeds funding scholarships for kids who wanted to study nursing. The symbolism was delicious. Nurses cared for me when my son wouldn't, so nurses would benefit from what he lost. Weeks later, when I was stronger, I invited him and his wife over. They came, smug, expecting perhaps a financial discussion. I served tea, calm, polite, and then I slid the envelope across the table. Inside, a copy of my new will. He read it, his face drained of color. His wife's eyes bulged. "Mom, what is this? Where's my inheritance?" "Gone," I said simply. "Given to people who deserve it more than you ever did." His wife exploded. "This is unfair. After everything Tom has done for you." I laughed. "Done for me? He couldn't even drive me home after surgery." Silence, heavy, crushing. My son stammered. "But we thought you understood. We had plans." I leaned forward, my voice ice cold. "I understood perfectly. That night, you showed me my worth in your eyes, so now I've shown you yours in mine." 9. The payoff. Watching Karmaland. They left in a storm of anger, slamming doors, cursing. But me? I felt lighter than I had in years. For once I wasn't the one begging for scraps of affection. Weeks later, I heard from mutual relatives that my son was furious. He told everyone I was spiteful and ungrateful, but when family asked why, the truth came out. How he abandoned me after surgery. Let's just say sympathy was not on his side. People were disgusted. Even his friends pulled back. And me? I sat on my porch, sipping tea, smiling. Revenge didn't just feel sweet, it felt just. When you're lying in a hospital bed, half conscious from anesthesia, your mind does strange things. Mine didn't wander to money, or property, or even the surgery I'd just survived. It wandered back to when my son was 5 years old. I remembered him clutching my hand as we crossed a busy street, his little fingers squeezing mine so tightly as if letting go meant losing the whole world. Back then, I was his world. He looked at me with trust, with love, with the kind of innocence only a child can give. And in that sterile white hospital room with machines beeping and my body aching, I couldn't help but ask myself, when did all that change? Was it gradual? Was it the day he met his wife, Sarah, and suddenly I became the old baggage? Or had I always been a stepping stone, useful only until he found someone new? The pain in my hip was nothing compared to that question gnawing at my heart. Let me tell you about Sarah. My daughter-in-law wasn't always cruel. When my son first introduced her, I thought she was sweet. Polite smile, soft-spoken. She even brought me flowers once. But over time, her mask slipped. She'd make little comments at dinners. "Wow, this house is cozy. I guess it's fine for now until Tom and I get something bigger. You still work at your age?" I'd be exhausted. But I guess some people just don't know when to stop. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Like I was less. Like my worth had expired. And Tom? My son just sat there nodding, laughing at her little digs, never defending me. I began to realize Sarah wasn't just another personality in his life. She was steering him, molding him. She wanted him cut off from me, because control works best when there are no competing voices. So when he refused to pick me up after surgery, I didn't just blame him. I blamed her, the whispers in his ear, the poison in his mind. But in the end, he made the choice, and that choice would cost him everything. After that nurse dropped me home, silence filled every corner. You'd think silence is peaceful. But after surgery, when you can't move, when every creak of the floorboards reminds you you're alone, silence is suffocating. I shuffled to the kitchen, clinging to the walker. I opened the fridge. Empty, just half a bottle of milk and some wilted lettuce. I hadn't shopped before the surgery because I assumed, naively, that my son would be here, that he'd fill my fridge, that he'd cook, laugh, maybe even tuck me in like I once tucked him in. Instead, I ate stale crackers and cried so hard I thought the stitches might tear. That was the night I decided I'd never cry for them again. Now you have to understand something. I may look like a frail old woman, But life had hardened me in ways my son and his wife couldn't imagine. When his father left, I learned how to stretch a dollar until it screamed. I learned how to patch shoes, fix plumbing, negotiate bills, and smile through humiliation when collectors called. But I also learned how to save, even if it was just $5 a week. Over decades, those little drops became a lake. I never told anyone. Not friends, not coworkers, not even my son. Why? Because money changes people. And I wanted to know who loved me without it. Now I had my answer. Chapter 5. The First Taste of Karma. A week after my surgery, while I was still hobbling around, my neighbor came over with gossip. Apparently Sarah had been bragging at a dinner party about the upcoming inheritance. She had it all planned: a new house, luxury car, maybe even a vacation to Europe. My neighbor shook her head. "They're counting your money before you're even gone." I smiled. For the first time in days, I smiled, because they thought they had won. And there's nothing sweeter than letting greedy people celebrate too early. Here's how it went down. Step 1. Call my lawyer. I explained everything. He raised his eyebrows, nodded, and said, "We can make this ironclad. If they think they're getting a dime, they're in for a shock." Step 2. Rewrite my will. Instead of one beneficiary, I had many. The hospital foundation that helped me, a charity for single mothers, scholarships for nursing students, and even a small fund for that volunteer nurse who drove me home. Step 3. Transfer ownership of my house into a trust that would activate the moment I passed. And Step 4, the most delicious, draft a letter, sealed with the will, explaining exactly why my son and Sarah were cut off. I wanted them to know, to feel it, to taste the bitterness of their own neglect. When I finally revealed the new will, I didn't just slide it across the table. No, I let them sit in their assumptions first. Sarah leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine, smirking like a queen. "So, what's the plan, Mom? Should we start looking at bigger houses now or wait until, you know?" The audacity made my skin crawl. That's when I placed the envelope down, slow, deliberate. "Why don't you read this first?" I said. Tom opened it. His eyes scanned, his face drained of all color. Sarah snatched it from him, her nails scraping the paper. The room was silent except for the sound of her breathing growing louder, harsher, like a kettle about to scream. "This has to be a joke," she spat. "Tell me this is a joke." I sipped my tea, calm, unbothered. "No joke. Every penny, every asset. It's gone to people who actually know the meaning of loyalty." My son's lip trembled. He looked at me not with love, not even with anger, just disbelief, like the rug of entitlement had been yanked from under his feet. News spread fast in families, doesn't it? My relatives heard. Some called to cheer me on. Others whispered that maybe I was too harsh. But when they heard the truth, how he left me stranded after surgery, those whispers died quick. And Sarah? Oh, she couldn't take the humiliation. She ranted on social media about toxic parents and fake sob stories. But people knew. Screenshots of her own bragging about inheritance started circulating. Her own friends turned on her. One even commented publicly, "Maybe if you treated her better, she wouldn't have left you nothing." Delicious. Do you know what peace feels like? It's sitting on your porch at sunset, tea in hand, knowing the people who thought they could walk all over you are now choking on their own arrogance. It is hearing that Sarah and my son had to downsize because their future money vanished. It's opening letters from nursing students thanking me for giving them a chance to study, knowing those kids will grow into the kind of caregivers my own child failed to be. That is peace. I once believed being a parent meant giving without limits, that no matter how much they took, I had to keep giving. But I learned something. Love without respect is slavery, and sacrifice without gratitude is just exploitation. So if you're re-listening to this and you've ever been made to feel like you are a burden, remember this: you are not weak. You are not disposable. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't shouting or fighting back. It is living well while they sit in the ashes of their own greed. The human mind is cruel. It remembers things you'd rather forget, especially when you're lying awake at night. I remembered the winter of 1997. I had only $20 left until payday. My son needed a coat because his old one was too small and the zipper broke. I went without groceries that week. I stretched cans of beans into meals, skipped lunch at work, and gave him that coat wrapped in newspaper because I couldn't even afford wrapping paper. He had smiled so wide. He hugged me and said, "You're the best mom in the world." And now, decades later, that same boy wouldn't even drive across town to pick me up from a hospital. Do you see the cruelty of memory? It stabs harder than any scalpel. It didn't take long for my extended family to hear about what happened. Word spreads like wildfire when there's money involved. My sister called first. She whispered, like she was holding in laughter, "So, your golden boy isn't inheriting after all?" Her kids, my son's cousins, were furious with him. They grew up seeing how hard I worked. One of them even messaged me, "Auntie, he doesn't deserve you. If I'd known you needed someone to drive you home, I'd have been there in a heartbeat." When my son heard about the cousins siding with me, he exploded. He texted me in all caps, "You're turning everyone against me." No, I thought, you did that yourself. Sarah couldn't handle the embarrassment. She showed up at my door one afternoon, dressed like she'd just stepped off a magazine cover, her perfume choking the air. She didn't knock, she barged in. "Listen," she hissed, "you don't know how this looks. Tom deserves that inheritance. We need it. You're being dramatic over one mistake." One mistake. That's what she called it. I stood tall, cane in hand. A mistake is forgetting to buy milk. Abandoning your own mother after surgery is cruelty. She rolled her eyes. "You're old. You don't understand how busy we are. We can't drop everything for you." And that's when I said the words that cut deeper than any will. If you can't drop everything for me once, don't expect me to drop everything for you when I'm gone. Her face twisted. She realized then that this wasn't just about money, it was about legacy. And she'd already lost. Chapter 14. The community reacts. It's funny. When you live long enough, you become part of the fabric of a community. The cashier at the grocery store, the mailman, the woman who runs the bakery, they all knew me. And when they heard how my son abandoned me, their faces told the story. Disbelief, anger, disgust. One neighbor even told me, "I always thought Tom was polite, but I guess money shows who people really are." And the best part? Sarah's reputation started to crumble too. She thrived on being the perfect wife in social circles, but soon people whispered about how she schemed for my money. Invitations dried up. Friends ghosted her. Karma works like a slow leak. You don't notice until the whole tire's flat. Weeks later, my son came to me alone. No Sarah this time. He looked smaller, like the arrogance had been chipped away. His voice cracked when he said, "Mom, please. I messed up. I wasn't thinking. I should have been there." For a moment, my heart softened. For a split second, I saw the little boy in the new winter coat again. But then I remembered the hospital room, the silence, the click of the phone when he hung up. I looked him straight in the eyes. "You made your choice. Now you live with it." He cried. Actual tears. But sometimes tears don't wash away sins. They just stain the floor. Here's something my son never expected. When I rewrote my will, I didn't just cut him out. I added a clause. It stated that if he or Sarah ever contested my will in court, they would be legally obligated to pay all fees, on both sides. So when Sarah tried to convince him to fight it, they met with a lawyer who laughed in their faces. "If you contest this, you'll go bankrupt just paying the fees." The fury on Sarah's face when she realized I had outsmarted her? Priceless. I didn't just leave a will. I left letters, one for my lawyer to deliver to Tom after I was gone. It said, "I loved you more than life itself, but love without respect is worthless. This was your choice, not mine. I hope you find peace someday, but you'll never find it in my bank account." Another letter went to the volunteer nurse who drove me home. I told her, "You reminded me that kindness still exists. For that, I thank you with all my heart." And letters to the charities and students who would benefit. Because if my legacy wasn't going to be my son, then it would be strangers who actually cared. Years from now, when I'm gone, people will walk into hospitals with scholarships in their hands. They'll save lives. They'll comfort patients. They'll drive lonely old women home when their own children refuse. That's my legacy. And my son? His legacy will be the story of how he lost everything because of arrogance and neglect. Sometimes people ask me, don't you feel guilty, cutting off your own son? Guilty? No. What I feel is free. Free from the chains of obligation. Free from the cycle of giving and never receiving. And if my story teaches anyone anything, let it be this. Blood is not an excuse for betrayal. If someone shows you who they are, believe them. And if someone leaves you in your hour of need, don't leave them in your will. The last time I saw Sarah, she tried one final jab. She sneered, "When you die, nobody will remember you." I smiled, calm, confident. Maybe not. But nurses, single mothers, and children will live better lives because of me. That's more than anyone will ever say about you. Her silence was the sweetest music I've ever heard. Time is a strange thing. The older you get, the faster it moves. But when you're waiting for karma, it feels deliciously slow. In the months after I rewrote my will, my son and Sarah's lives began to unravel. They had planned their future around money that wasn't theirs. Vacations, luxury cars, a new house in a better neighborhood. But when reality hit, they had to downsize. Their dream house slipped through their fingers. Sarah's designer handbags and spa memberships vanished. My son started working overtime to keep up with bills. They weren't suffering exactly, but they were struggling, and struggling eats pride like rust eats metal. Everywhere they went, whispers followed. Isn't that the couple who left his mom stranded in the hospital? Didn't she brag about an inheritance and then lose it? Sarah hated it. She thrived on appearances, and appearances were crumbling. She withdrew from social circles. My son grew quieter, avoiding eye contact when people asked about me. And me? I didn't even have to lift a finger. Karma was my soldier. One evening, years later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it, and there stood my son, alone. No Sarah. He looked older, not just in age, but in spirit. His shoulders sagged. His eyes were tired. He wasn't the arrogant man who once counted my money as his own. He was just Tom, my boy. "Mom," he whispered. "I came to say I'm sorry." For a moment, my heart softened. For a moment, I wanted to reach out and hug him. But then he added, "Sarah left. She said I was useless without money." And just like that, my sympathy vanished. Not because of his pain, but because of the timing. He hadn't come when I was weak, when I was abandoned. He only came when he was abandoned. I let him inside. We had tea. We talked. But in my heart I knew. Forgiveness didn't mean restoration. Some bridges once burned are better left as ashes. Funny thing about life, it gives you new family when the old one fails you. That nurse who drove me home, we became close. She invited me to family dinners. Her children called me Grandma. On holidays, they brought me gifts, laughter, and hugs, the very things my son had stopped giving long ago. I didn't ask for a replacement family, but life gave me one anyway. And sometimes the ones who choose you love harder than the ones you gave birth to. One crisp autumn afternoon, I found myself back at the same hospital where my surgery had taken place. Not for me this time. I was healthy enough. I was there to meet a group of students, the first recipients of the scholarship fund my estate had set up. Bright-eyed, full of hope, they shook my hand, thanking me. One girl said, "Because of you, I get to be the first nurse in my family." My eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, of pride. I realized then, my legacy wasn't in my son's hands. It was here, in these young lives, in every patient they would care for, in every old woman they would drive home. That was the real revenge. Not just taking something away from those who hurt me, but giving it to those who would use it for good. When I think back to that night in the hospital, the memory no longer hurts. Instead, it feels like the moment the universe gave me clarity. I saw who my son truly was, and who I truly needed to become. And I became stronger, sharper, unbreakable. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about redirection, taking the love, the money, the energy you once poured into the wrong people and giving it to the right ones. That's justice. That's peace. The last time I saw Sarah was at the grocery store. She was older, too. No fancy clothes, no smug smile, just a woman dragging her cart, bitterness carved into every wrinkle. Our eyes met. She sneered, expecting me to look away. I didn't. I smiled, calm, content, and I said softly, just loud enough for her to hear, "Thank you." She blinked, confused. "Thank you," I repeated. "Because without your cruelty, I would have never found real family. Without your greed, I would have never left a legacy that matters." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She turned and fled. And me? I walked away lighter than I had in decades. Because revenge wasn't about watching her fall. It was about watching myself rise. Final wrap-up, narrator's voice to audience. So if you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, if you've ever been left behind, abandoned, or treated like you don't matter, remember this story. Because sometimes revenge doesn't come in fire and fury. Sometimes it comes in peace, in quiet strength, in living well, and in leaving a legacy that no one can take away. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge is knowing that the ones who broke you will spend the rest of their lives wishing they hadn't a tea. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and subscribe for more. Tell me in the comments, if you were in my shoes, would you have cut your child out of the will? Or would you have given them one last chance? And remember, karma may take its time, but it never forgets. Before I dive into the chaos of what my son and his wife did to me, you need to understand who I am, and why what they did cut so deeply. I wasn't born with much. I grew up in a tiny apartment with creaky floors, secondhand clothes, and a father who disappeared before I even turned 10. Life taught me early that if I wanted stability, I had to fight for it myself, and I did. When I had my son, I swore he would never know the kind of emptiness I had felt. I wasn't just his mother. I was his shield, his safety net, his anchor. Every decision I made, every sacrifice, was for him. I worked 2 jobs most of his childhood. Days at the grocery store, nights cleaning offices, my hands raw from bleach and scrubbing. There were times I went without dinner so that he could have seconds. Winters where I wore the same worn-out coat while saving enough to get him a brand new one. I used to tell myself, if he's warm, then I'm warm enough. Vacations? I couldn't afford them. But I saved every little penny to make his birthdays feel magical. Balloons, homemade cakes, toys I had to secretly put on layaway months in advance. I remember watching his face light up, thinking, it's worth it. Every blister, every sleepless night, it's all worth it. And when he grew older, when school got harder, I was there too. Late nights at the kitchen table, helping him with math homework, I barely understood myself. Encouraging him before every exam, telling him over and over, you can do this. You're destined for more than I ever had. I never remarried. Not because I didn't have the chance, but because I didn't want my son to ever feel like he came second in my life. He was my world, my everything. So when I tell you what happened after my surgery, that moment when he and his wife refused to take me home, you'll understand why it broke something inside me. Because when you've built your entire existence around one person, and they show you you're nothing but a burden to them, it's not just betrayal, it's annihilation. The day of my surgery, I remember clutching the thin hospital blanket, trying to stay calm as the anesthesiologist prepped me. My heart was racing, but not because of the operation itself. I wasn't afraid of the knife or the pain. What scared me most was being alone. I told myself, don't worry, your son will be there when you wake up. He promised. That thought was the only thing that got me through. Hours later, when I opened my eyes in recovery, everything was a blur. My body felt heavy, stitched together, and weak. But my mind had one question. Where's my son? A nurse leaned over me with a gentle smile. Do you have someone to drive you home? She asked softly. Yes, I whispered. My son should be here. But he wasn't. I checked my phone, my fingers trembling. No missed calls, no reassuring message, just silence. I dialed his number, forcing cheerfulness into my voice despite the lump in my throat. Hey, sweetheart, I'm ready to go home. Could you come pick me up? There was a pause, then his voice, flat, almost irritated. Mom, about that. Sarah and I are busy. Can't you just call a cab? For a moment I thought I had misheard him. A cab? After surgery? After everything? I tried to keep my voice steady. Honey, I just had stitches. I can barely walk. I really need you. In the background, I heard Sarah's voice, sharp, dismissive. She'll be fine. Just tell her to manage. And then my son sighed. Mom, please don't make this a big deal. We've got plans tonight. Just figure it out. The line went dead. I sat there frozen, the phone heavy in my hand, my chest hollow. The nurse must be seeing the tears forming in my eyes because she touched my shoulder gently and said, Don't worry, I'll get you home. Imagine that. A nurse, a stranger, showed me more kindness in that moment than my own flesh and blood. She helped me into her car, carefully buckling me in like I was her own mother. The drive was quiet, except for my shallow breaths and the sound of rain against the windshield. My stitches ached with every bump in the road, but the pain inside me was so much worse. When we pulled up to my little house, she carried my bag to the porch, made sure I was steady on my feet, and even left me her number in case I needed help. I thanked her, but the words felt hollow because gratitude was tangled with humiliation. Inside, the house was cold and silent. I lowered myself into the kitchen chair and just sat there staring at nothing. For years I had dreamed of this phase of life. My son grown, married, maybe even bringing grandchildren over. I thought I'd finally get to be cared for, just a little, after a lifetime of giving. Instead, I realized I was utterly, completely alone. That night, in the stillness of my kitchen, something inside me broke. But in its place, something new began to form, a quiet, burning resolve. I whispered into the darkness, barely able to speak through the ache in my chest. Never again. They will regret this. In the days after surgery, while I was supposed to be resting, I found myself replaying every moment in my head. The way my son had spoken to me, cold, detached, as if I were some stranger asking for a favor. And slowly I realized this hadn't happened overnight. Sarah. The first time he brought her home, I'll admit, I tried to welcome her. She was all polished smiles and expensive perfume, the kind of woman who could light up a room with charm. But beneath that charm, there was something else, something sharper. At dinner, she'd drop little comments wrapped in sweetness. Oh, wow, your mom still lives in this old place? That's cozy. Or, it must have been so hard raising a child all by yourself. No wonder you never remarried. Tiny daggers disguised as casual remarks. I ignored them at first, thinking, she's young, she doesn't know better. My son will see through it. But he didn't. As months turned into years, I noticed the change. He called less, visited less. And when he did, Sarah's hand was always looped through his arm, her eyes scanning my home like it was beneath her. She'd whisper things just loud enough for me to hear. Your mom worries too much. She's always making you feel guilty. She'll be fine. She's stronger than she acts. And my son, my sweet boy who once clung to my hand on the first day of kindergarten, began to pull away. At first it was subtle, forgetting to call me back, canceling dinner at the last minute. Then it became more blatant. Mom, we're busy. Mom, you'll understand when we have our own life. Mom, stop being so dramatic. Each phrase chipped away at the bond we once had, until by the time of my surgery, it was Sarah's voice that echoed loudest in his head, not mine. And here's the cruelest part. She didn't just want his love, she wanted control. She wanted me erased. At family gatherings, she bragged openly about their future. When we inherit, we'll finally be able to move into something bigger. She said it as if my life, my home, my savings were already hers, as if I were nothing more than a placeholder, waiting to die. I would sit quietly, forcing a smile, while my stomach twisted. My son never corrected her. He just sat there, nodding, and that is when it hit me. The betrayal in the hospital wasn't just negligence. It was conditioning. Years of subtle poison dripping into his ear until he saw me not as his mother, but as an obstacle, a burden, a check waiting to be cashed. That night, sitting alone in my kitchen, I realized something. If I didn't take back control, they would destroy me piece by piece until there was nothing left. So I made a decision. I would not beg. I would not cry. I would not chase after their love anymore. Instead, I would show them exactly who they had underestimated. And that was the night the first seed of my revenge was planted. That night, I didn't sleep. My stitches throbbed, but the ache in my chest kept me awake more than any physical pain. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from the cup. For years, that table had been the place of bedtime stories, homework sessions, birthday cakes. It held the history of my sacrifices. And now, it became the place where I began to rethink my future. I asked myself, if they see me as nothing but a burden, then what am I really to them? The answer stung. A wallet, a roof, an inheritance. And if that's all I was to them, maybe it was time to rewrite the script. The thought was terrifying, but also liberating. For so long, I had lived in fear of losing my son's love. I walked on eggshells around Sarah. I swallowed insults. I endured humiliation because I thought being needed was the only way to stay connected. But now I saw the truth. I wasn't needed. I was used. So I pulled out an old notebook from the drawer, the kind I used to keep grocery lists in, and I began to write. Page 1, at the top, in big, shaky letters, what do I want? And for the first time in decades, the answer didn't include my son. I wanted peace. I wanted dignity. I wanted to leave behind a legacy, not to people who saw me as a burden, but to those who would actually value it. As the pen scratched against the paper, ideas began to form. Financial records I'd kept tucked away in a shoebox. Old investment accounts from years of penny pinching. The house I owned outright. They thought I was poor. They thought all I had was a roof and some old furniture. What they didn't know was that I had quietly built a nest egg, small at first, but it had grown into something substantial, enough to matter. Enough to hurt them if it slipped through their greedy fingers. For the first time in years, I felt something other than sorrow. I felt power. I closed the notebook, pressed my palm against the cover, and whispered to myself, they think they're playing me. But the game has only just begun. And that was the night my plan for revenge was born. They thought I was powerless. They thought they could neglect me, dismiss me, and still inherit everything when I was gone. But they had no idea. I'd been planning for years, and now I was ready to strike. The morning after my sleepless night, I shuffled to my little desk in the corner of the living room. The air still smelled faintly of antiseptic from the hospital, and my body screamed with weakness. But my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I pulled out the shoebox from the bottom drawer, the one I'd guarded for decades. Inside were old check stubs, crumpled deposit slips, and account statements that most people would have dismissed as scraps. But to me, it was proof of my life's work. Every dollar I had saved by skipping meals, every penny I tucked away instead of buying something for myself, every quiet, invisible sacrifice. It was all there. And to my surprise, it wasn't just a little. It was enough to change lives. There was the house, of course, fully paid off. Modest on the outside, but in this market worth hundreds of thousands. Then there were the investments, small at first, but compounding over decades had turned them into a sum that could easily support me, and then some. They had no idea. Sarah assumed I lived paycheck to paycheck, just scraping by. That's what she told people anyway. I let her, because underestimation, that was my greatest weapon. Over the following weeks, as my body healed, I started seeing them differently. My son and Sarah would stop by occasionally, not to check on me, but to inspect. Sarah's eyes always darted around the house, calculating. She'd run her hand over the dining table and whisper things like, you know, when we redo this place, we'll knock that wall down. Open concept is so much better. Or she'd smirk at my garden and say, this yard has potential. Once we inherit, I'll finally be able to hire landscapers. She said it right in front of me, as if I were invisible. And my son, he never stopped her. He never once told her to show some respect. Instead, he just nodded, sometimes even chuckling. That's when I knew they weren't waiting to care for me. They were waiting to cash me out. So I went to see a lawyer. I still remember the look on his face when I explained what I wanted. His eyebrows shot up. You want to add a no contest clause? Yes, I said firmly. If they try to fight the will, they lose everything. He leaned back in his chair. That's one way to protect your legacy. But, may I ask, who are you leaving it all to? I smiled for the first time in weeks. Not them. Never them. Instead, I listed charities I believed in. A scholarship fund for single mothers trying to go back to school. A donation to the very hospital where that kind nurse had shown me kindness when my own son wouldn't chim tea. And yes, a portion set aside for that nurse and her children, because strangers had shown me more compassion than my own blood, and I wasn't about to reward cruelty with wealth. The lawyer drafted it all up, airtight, ironclad. With every signature I placed on those documents, I felt lighter, stronger, freer. Meanwhile, Sarah kept circling like a vulture. One Sunday dinner, she poured herself a glass of wine and leaned across the table. So, have you ever thought about your will? It must be stressful trying to handle all that paperwork on your own. You know we'd be happy to help. Her tone was syrupy sweet, but her eyes, sharp as knives. I sipped my tea and gave her a small smile. Oh, don't you worry about that, dear. Everything is already taken care of. She grinned, squeezing my son's hand. Good. That's such a relief. And in that moment, I realized the brilliance of it all. They truly believed they had won. They were already spending money in their heads, redecorating my home, planning trips with money they thought would soon be theirs. But the beauty of greed is this. It blinds people. It makes them sloppy. It makes them predictable. And while they dreamed of inheritance, I was writing their nightmare. By the time the documents were finalized, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. My son and Sarah thought they were the chess masters, moving me around like a pawn. But little did they know, I had already checkmated them. Months passed. I healed, physically and emotionally, while my plan quietly sat in motion. My son and Sarah, meanwhile, grew bolder. They began dropping by more often, but not to care for me. No. Every visit was a reconnaissance mission. Sarah would peek into my cupboards, ask about bank accounts, even joke about downsizing when the time comes. And each time, I'd smile politely, sip my tea, and say nothing. Finally, I decided it was time. One evening, I invited them over for dinner. I cooked my son's favorite meal, roast chicken with garlic potatoes, the way I used to make when he was little. I set the table with my best china, lit candles, and for a moment I almost tricked myself into believing it was a family night. But then Sarah walked in. Her heels clicked across the floor as she scanned the table, smirking. Wow, this is nice. Getting fancy, are we? My son chuckled, taking a seat. Smells great, Mom. You didn't have to go all out. But I did. This wasn't just dinner. This was theater. Halfway through the meal, I placed a plain white envelope on the table. Neither of them noticed at first, too busy filling their plates. But when Sarah finally spotted it, her eyes narrowed. What's that? She asked. I leaned back, folding my hands calmly. Oh, just something I thought you two should see. Her manicured nails snatched the envelope before my son could react. She tore it open, her eyes scanning the legal pages inside. Slowly, her smile cracked, then crumbled. This says... Her voice shook with fury. This says we get nothing. My son blinked, confused. What? That can't be right. Mom. I met his eyes. Those same eyes I used to see light up on Christmas mornings, and said softly but firmly, It's right. Every word. Sarah slammed the papers down, her face red. You can't do this, after everything we've done for you. I laughed. Not a bitter laugh, but a free one. Everything you've done for me? You mean abandoning me at the hospital? Treating me like dead weight in my own home? Talking about my life like it's a bank account waiting to be cashed? My son opened his mouth, but no words came out. For once, Sarah had nothing clever to say either. I continued, my voice steady as steel. I gave my entire life to raising you. I sacrificed everything, and when I needed you most, you turned your back on me. That's when I realized love isn't measured in blood, it's measured in loyalty. And you, my dear, have none. Sarah hissed, "This isn't over. We'll fight this." I leaned forward, my smile cold. "Go ahead, but read the fine print, sweetheart. Contest the will, and you forfeit everything. Not just from me, but you'll be paying every legal fee along the way. I made sure of that." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's face twisted with rage. She shoved her chair back, grabbed her purse, and stormed toward the door. My son lingered, staring at me with something between shame and disbelief. But when Sarah barked his name, he followed, like a dog chasing its master. The door slammed. The house grew quiet again. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. Years rolled by. Sarah eventually left my son when the money dried up. Turns out greed makes for a weak foundation in marriage. He tried to reach out once or twice after that, but I didn't answer. Some bridges once burned should never be rebuilt. Instead, I built something new. I worked with my lawyer and the charities. The scholarship fund launched, and I began receiving letters, handwritten notes from young single mothers thanking me for giving them a chance at education, at a better life. Each one reminded me of my younger self, struggling but determined. The hospital invited me back as a donor. They even named a small wing after me. Walking down those halls, seeing my name etched into the wall, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not because my son might see it, but because I had left my mark on the world, my way. And that nurse? The one who drove me home when my own child wouldn't. Her children got scholarships. I watched them grow, graduate, and build lives of their own. They started calling me Grandma. In the family I lost, I found another, a truer one. One afternoon, years later, I ran into Sarah at the grocery store. Her once polished look had dulled. Bitterness etched deep lines into her face. She froze when she saw me, her mouth opening, then snapping shut. I simply smiled. "Thank you, Sarah," I said calmly. Her brow furrowed. "For what?" "For teaching me the truth. Without your cruelty, I might never have found real family, or real peace." I left her standing there, speechless among the produce, and walked out with my head held high. And so, here's what I've learned. Blood may bind us, but it does not define us. Family isn't about who shares your DNA. It's about who shows up when it matters most. My son and his wife thought they'd inherit a fortune. Instead, they inherited nothing but the consequences of their own greed. And me, I built a legacy that will outlive them all. Karma doesn't always come quickly, but when it does, it's devastatingly fair. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't at watching someone lose. It is knowing you built something better without them. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and tell me in the comments, what is the most satisfying revenge you've ever seen in real life? And of course, subscribe for more stories like this.